Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to bring you everything you need to know about the Manaforge Omega raid in the War Within Season 3. We're going to be breaking down the boss fights, how you might organize some healing cooldowns, and what cooldowns are going to be necessary as well. And of course, reminding you guys to like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. Starting off, we have the Plexus Sentinel. It's the first boss, and you are going to have to use your Reshi cloak that you get from your quest line to be able to survive this encounter. It's an extra action button, and it has about a 14-second cooldown on the fight, and it dashes your character forward, allowing you to immune the Arcano Matrix Atomizer, which is the big wall that is featured a couple different times on the Plexus Sentinel fight. He will send the wall at you in the intermission phase on normal and heroic, and even on mythic he'll send it regularly in the regular phase, and if you do not dash through the wall, you instantly die. His major mechanics are starting off with the manifest matrices. He's going to mark a few players with circles around them, and when the debuff expires, it's going to drop a displacement matrix. You're going to grab these and drag them to the sides of the room. Whenever a player walks into these, they get stunned, take a bunch of damage, and they get teleported to a random position and slowed. So you really want to make sure you move these out of the way off to the sides. The big damage on this encounter is the Obliteration Arcano Cannon. This is the tank debuff, just like the Pyro Party Pack if you played on Sprocketmonger Lock-and-Stock last season, where they target the tank and Giga Blast him and it explodes and deals drop-off damage. The tanks not only want to move this away from the group, but because of the large puddle that it forms afterwards, they want to move to like the corners of the room. So like the back left or the back right, while the raid is going to be in the middle. This way, later on, when there's some of the knockbacks, when the boss reaches maximum energy, you're not going to get knocked back into those big puddles, potentially taking more damage for your raid. Before the intermission phase goes out, you also have to deal with the Eradicating Salvo. This is like a double tap that targets one player, and it's a group-wide soak. When the first missile goes off, it knocks back all other players soaking it, and then it immediately fires another blast. So you ideally want to make sure you have classes like with Death's Advance that are not going to get knocked back, or you can have two groups split up to be able to alternate for the soak. You can have one group in, they get knocked back, and then the next group steps in immediately afterwards, and then you'll be just fine. Assuming you have good soaks for your raid, the Eradicating Salvo is usually not too heavy on damage in PTR, but the Obliteration Arcano Cannon was very heavy damage, and it happens about every 30 seconds, and this is a major area to align healing cooldowns, and you'll have two of the Arcano Cannons every phase. So you're going to have 2 rounds of big healing cooldowns split up by 30 seconds to carry you through that big damage. And when the boss reaches maximum energy, Protocol Purge will begin, knocking players back, and you have to make sure you don't get knocked back into any puddles or the stun matrices. And then fight against the knockback, because it's like Razageth, it's a continuous knockback. Then you're going to have to dodge through energy cutter beams, orbs that are expulsion zones that'll knock you back, and you're going to be taking ticking damage from the Purging Lightning from the boss. What you want to do is make sure that you are holding on to your Reshi Cloak cooldown for when the wall starts coming towards you, and then you have about a 10-yard dash from it. Make sure you give yourself a little leeway. You don't have to wait till the last minute. Dash through the boss, continue dodging cutter beams and orbs, and then get to the boss and break the shield to go back to the first phase. Big thing that you can do with the Reshi dash is you can also dash through the orbs and cutter beams without taking any damage. So if you can go through the wall and go through multiple beams or orbs and cut down on your movement time, you definitely want to do that. The second boss of the raid is Loom'ithar, which hangs in the middle of the room until she reaches 50% health. To start off, she casts Layer Weaving, which, if you play the Aranog encounter back in Vault of the Incarnates and Dragonflight, it feels very similar. She starts bringing in these tangled webs to start kind of choking the life out of the raid. And if you run through these webs, you get rooted, take a ton of damage. You don't want to be doing that. In order to DPS these tangled webs, you need to have the tanks aim their piercing strand frontal at the tangles themselves. This is then going to allow them to be attackable, and then you can DPS one of the strands, get out of there, and move back in before the next round of tangles come out. On Heroic, you have 2 attempts really with the Piercing Strand to get it right, so just make sure you identify those tangled webs early, and DPS are ready to swap to quickly break them. You also are having players getting targeted by Infusion Tether at the same time, where the boss drags them into the middle of the room and then starts pulling on them just a little bit. You need to go 40 yards from the boss to snap this tether. And when you do, you also drop silk on the ground. And if you end up having an infusion tether and you run onto another pile of silk on heroic difficulty, then you get stunned. So your goal, you're getting dragged into the boss. Once the tangle gets broken, run out to that blue line that you see all around the room, as that's around the point where you'll be able to snap your tether. And make sure when you reach that line, you're not standing in somebody else's silk puddle. This will happen twice in a row before the boss casts his Over Infusion Burst. On PTR, it didn't deal a huge amount of damage, but this should be a primary damage mechanic happening around a minute 15 into the encounter, where you're going to need some good healing cooldowns. Before then, you really want to focus on just prio healing the infusion targets, maybe helping damage the tangles if you can. After the Over Infusion Burst, the phase will repeat again once more, the back-to-back tangles, breaking out of them, and after 2 rounds of the layer weaving, then you'll have the Over Infusion Burst. When the boss reaches 50%, it'll actually rip herself from the ceiling and crash down into the earth, dealing a whole bunch of damage in the process, and also creating a massive puddle in the middle of the room that's going to continuously be expanding. From this area, it's really important for the tanks to give everyone enough space to be able to move around the room, and you're also going to have to deal with the Arcane Outrage from the boss. This happens around every 25 to 30 seconds in the final phase, so it's a lot of damage, so it's not a bad thing to bring too many healers on this fight. You're going to have to deal with this really heavy damage and need to cycle raid cooldowns to deal with it, while also dealing with a new tank buster called the Writhing Wave. The Writhing Wave is going to require the entire raid to split up soaks with your tank. And if you fail to do so, it's going to wipe the team. So you're going to need half the group in one of the tank soaks, other half of the raid in the next round of soaks. And in between these writhing waves are also more arcane outrages. So there's a lot of damage going out onto this one. Split up your raid in halves, make sure half is soaking each time for the writhing wave, alternate big healing cooldowns, and keep moving the boss out of the puddle so that nobody's taking too much additional damage in the process. Soulbinder Naazindhri is the third boss, and he features massive canisters around the room of ethereals he's trying to turn into the Shadow Guard, and our goal is to stop him. The 3 mobs that you have to deal with out of the Shadow Guard are assassins that will ambush your target and put up a 30-second dot, mages, which will have a magical debuff they'll apply to enemies through Void Burst that can be interrupted. You can also Mass Dispel, bring your magical Revival Dispel, a few different options that you have there. Shadow Priests should make sure they're spec'd into their Mass Dispel as well. And you have Phase Blades, which are also going to cause damage to jump between all players whenever they attack. The whole goal in this encounter is to kill as many adds as you can before the adds basically awaken throughout the fight. We didn't find any of them to be super difficult to kill on PTR, but I'd imagine on live there will be a target focus that I think would probably be the Phase Blades. But things, of course, can change. How you break out these adds is going to be through the Soulflay Annihilation. 2 players are going to be targeted, and they send out an orb very, very far. You could aim it all the way across the room if you really needed to. It sends out this orb, and when it hits the canister that's trying to form the Shadow Guard, it causes an explosion, breaks out the ad so you can DPS it, and the ad takes 200% more damage, making it incredibly easy to kill. Keep in mind, if you or another player gets hit by the orb is consumed, and you cannot break out the canister. And so if somebody body blocks it, that just ruins your opportunity to kill off that ad. You want to make sure you have a clear line of sight. You can also run through the canisters if you need to, because the orbs do move pretty quick. So if you're right next to a canister, make sure you run behind it so that it's in between you and the boss. The boss will also cast Soulfire Convergence on a number of players, which are spawning different orbs. Now, these are very similar to the orbs you might remember out of like Nexus Princess Kaveza, where they just spawn out of your character, blast across the room. These orbs do not break out ads. and they deal a good chunk of damage to any players that get hit by them, so make sure you just move out of the room, stay spread out. Tanks will have to deal with the Mystic Lash from the boss, which is dealing ever increasing amounts of damage throughout the channel. The final hit is going to be dealing the largest amount of damage, and you'll just tank swap after each Mystic Lash cast completes. The usual cadence is you're going to have the new set of orbs coming out from the Convergence and from the Soulflay Annihilation, breaking out the ads with the Soulflay Annihilation. Ads are out, you kill off the ads, and then soon after, the boss is going to cast Arcane Expulsion. Like I said, this happens around every 35 to 40 seconds, and is the major time to use cooldowns regularly for healing. It knocks players back and deals a good chunk of damage, and has a dot after effect to it as well. Watch where you're getting knocked back, because you can get knocked off the platform of the encounter. There's a number of different nasty edges on this fight, and make sure that you're kind of coordinating where you're going to move across the room to break out the next round of ads. Keep in mind, these ads are trying to form themselves into minions, and at the 2-minute mark, that's when all of the ads that you did not kill form, come to life, and start attacking. You want to make sure misdirects and anything you can do to help out tank threat is done at this point, and make sure that you're keeping all of these ads in melee so that tanks can quickly get threat on them. This is also a major time for healing cooldowns, because you're not only going to have to deal with a lot of the cleave damage and just natural hits from the mobs, but the Shadow Guard mages with their Void Burst also are going to deal a lot of damage if any of their casts get off. And they're putting up massive debuffs on the entire raid that also stack. This is where you want to use the Revival, the Mass Dispel, the major damage reduction cooldowns, because there's a lot of different ways you can kind of get wombo combo killed out of the blue. So when all these ads spawn, just make sure you hit a defensive even before damage happens to be safe. Forgeweaver Araz is all about spawning ads properly and cleaving them down effectively. The main mechanic on the encounter is he has this room filled with 3 pylons. These are the arcane collectors all around the room. He'll be empowering one of these pylons, spawning some swirlies from it, and you also are going to have players targeted by Astral Harvest. He's going to target 3 or 4 players with this Astral Harvest debuff that will mark them with a nice rune circle underneath their feet, and then power will tether them to an arcane collector, which will show where you're going to spawn this arcane manifestation, basically an arcane orb. The arcane orb spawns at your location and moves to the pylon that you are tethered to, that your energy is flowing towards. The goal is to make sure that you have the boss in between you and the collector, so it has to drag itself through melee first for extra cleave damage to kill quickly and effectively. Grips, knockbacks, Ring of Peace worked on PTR to slow down these ads and make it a lot easier to just keep on focusing the boss and pummel as much cleave damage into them as you can. The boss has a lot of swirlies on the fight. Some of them are going to silence you, so if you see any magic debuffs on the fight, just make sure you dispel immediately every single time. The Tank Buster, you want to get like 2 or 3 stacks of it with overwhelming power before you tank swap, because the debuff lasts for 46 seconds. It's a very, very long time. So make sure you get a couple stacks first before you swap off. The biggest damage of the fight for the raid is the Arcane Obliteration. This is going to target the tanks, and the tanks are placing this group-wide soak. It happens around every 45 seconds or so. It starts around 30 seconds into the fight and then happens again 45 or so seconds later. And this is where you want to stack a lot of damage reduction and a lot of raid healing cooldowns. You want to have the raid split into 2 different groups to help with these soaks, and the tanks need to move them far enough away from the boss so that they're not going to be too close to activate the Mark of Power. They need to be 20 yards away from each other at least, to make sure that they don't empower, deal more damage, and also take less damage. So split the raid in half, make sure you get the soak. You have a debuff that prevents you from soaking again for another 1.5 minutes or so, and then you're also going to trigger a lot of healing absorbs. So half the raid is going to need a ton of output. When this echo spawns, you can tank it as any other ad, and you can also move it around as you wish, but keep in mind it has to be 20 yards away from the boss. This ad is going to echo a lot of the mechanics of the boss, spawning more swirlies and adding some more things that you need to dodge. It is a prio target that you want to kill off as fast as possible, because soon afterwards you get more arcane orbs that you need to kill off too. So ads are a priority here. As the intermission is going to begin, the boss casts Arcane Expulsion. It's a good time for damage reduction, but you don't need a ton of healing cooldowns here. The intermission is going to be putting out some stacking rot damage. Our intermission phases lasted around 45 or 50 seconds, so you want to make sure you're alternating between healing cooldowns starting about 20 to 25 seconds into the intermission phase and space them out until the end. The intermission phase is all about killing off these arcane collectors. They are going to be having some more laser beams you have to dodge, but also if one of the pylons reach max energy, they radiate raid damage and will wipe you. So some of the arcane collectors are going to build up energy faster than others, and they need to be prioritized first. So make sure you send your melee off to kill that priority target that's gaining more energy, and then make sure your ranger around in the center so that they can multi-dot and cleave as best they can. The intermission phase also has shielded attendants that are spawning that tanks need to be picking up. They have these hardened shells that might make them take a little bit longer to die, but they're really not a priority target at all. You want to just kind of cleave them down as best you can. A very important thing is that they ramp up in damage with ramping power. Every consecutive melee attack against the same target increases the caster's attack speed, and it stacks quite a lot. So tanks just need to make sure that they swap adds between each other. You're not going to see the debuff on yourself, but it's going to be the buff on that mob. Make sure you keep on switching frequently enough so you're not taking too much damage, because these adds are probably going to live for quite a while. When you kill the last pylon, the boss stuns himself and takes 100% increased damage for 12 seconds. It's a huge time for some massive damage, and it's also a great way to make sure that the adds get cleaved down, as you want to be pooling up, saving up cooldowns, possibly bloodlust, to make sure you're just maximizing your damage in this phase. Around 25% is when the boss is going to push into the final phase, and then the boss is going to cast Dark Terminus, knocking the entire raid back. And you want to make sure you get knocked towards the entrance where you walked into the room, because the opposite side, where the forge is at, is going to be filled with this dark singularity. It's going to be this void cosmic field that's going to deal tremendous amounts of damage and start sucking the raid towards it. The big thing in this final phase is dealing with the void manifestations. These are spawning very similarly on player locations, just like the arcane orbs. These void orbs, same concept. If they hit the field of cosmic void energy at the end of the room, they explode and you got a big problem. Keep in mind, you're going to have access to Warlock gateways. A lot of different movement speed tools like Stampeding Roar are fantastic for this. You can also make sure you're taking advantage of your grips and Ring of Peace to make sure that these void adds are staying close to the boss and not getting too close to that cosmic field to explode on the raid. You still have to deal with some of the tank busters. You still have to deal with some of the silencing tempests. So make sure you're watching your feet and burn the boss down from there. The Soul Hunters encounter features 3 unique Demon Hunters with their own abilities and multiple different intermission phases. The Void Demon Hunter, Araz, is going to spawn Devourer's Ire at the very beginning of the encounter, which are some of these shadow puddles that you need to make sure you soak. It doesn't matter who soaks them so much at the start, because you're going to need to pass these around quite a lot. The debuff is going to stack, increasing damage and heal absorb on the player over time, so we were dispelling around 8 or 9 stacks on heroic testing. What you want to do with this Devourer's Ire is leave it on players until around the 8 or 9 stack mark, and whenever the boss is casting Void Step, they're doing a Void charge through the raid, and then soon afterwards, copies of this Void Demon Hunter are spawning Void Puddles on the ground. You need to have players who have the magic debuff, Devourer's Ire, soaking up these puddles and clearing up the room every single time. These debuffs are going to stay throughout the entire encounter, so they're going to need a lot of spot healing onto these players, and whenever you dispel it, it's going to jump to the nearest player, so you can game who is going to be receiving them the entire time. Velarin is the Havoc Demon Hunter, and they're going to be casting the Hunt onto a target. They're going to have the big scary eyes above their head for that player, and that player is then going to want to move further away from the boss to stretch the line out so that other players can move in and help out with the soak. On heroic difficulty, each player in the soak for the hunt is also going to have a circle around them, so they can't stack on the circle or they can't stack in the line. Otherwise, they're going to cleave their allies in the process. So make sure whoever's fixated stands far enough away that you can fit plenty of your allies. We had like 5 or 6 players at least in each of the soaks, and that worked out just fine. Velarin casts Fel Inferno at the beginning of the encounter, which closes in the space for the arena and deals a tremendous amount of damage, so you're going to want to have some big healing on the pull. We didn't see this consistently repeated on other phases, but I'm not sure if that's going to be the case or if it's only at the beginning of the fight. The Havoc Demon Hunter will also cast I-Beam onto the tanks, and this is a key area to make sure that the tanks are facing away from the raid when this is going to happen, because it's a huge amount of cleave and knockback effect onto it. The Vengeance Demon Hunter is Elisa, and she casts Fracture onto the tanks, which is going to be the primary tank swap they have. During this period, the boss is also going to be spawning fragmented souls that other players beyond the tank, that are not the tank, are going to need to pick up. Players that run over these green soaks are going to take a pretty hefty 30-second dot, so they're going to be another area with some more priority healing required for them. All these frailties need to be soaked before the boss is casting Spirit Bomb, which happens around 30 seconds into the fight, and then about every 30 seconds afterwards. It's going to do a decent amount of AoE, but put up a pretty sizable heal absorb onto the raid. If any fractured souls are still existing and not soaked, they explode and deal way more damage, and a 20-second dot on top of it out of Expulsed Soul. Each Demon Hunter has their own unique intermission phase. It starts with Void, then into Havoc, then into the Vengeance Demon Hunter. The Void intermission is called Collapsing Star, and it's very much like Farak if you played in Amir Drasil, except there is a black hole in the center of the room that deals a ton of damage to you. You pretty much insta-die if you stand in there, and stars are coming from the edge of the room trying to get sucked into the black hole. Every time you soak one of these stars, it's going to put up about a 5-second dot. We were taking 2 to maybe 3 maximum stacks there before we let the 5-second debuff drop off and then start soaking new ones. Make sure you're spread out throughout this intermission phase and just help soak. Valarin, the Havoc Demon Hunter's intermission phase, is Fel Rush. Now this is Blaze Lines, also very similar to Farak. You're going to see Demon Hunters around the room who are going to target you and then aim a dash through your character, and you have to make sure you're not moving and not cleaving through a bunch of other people. If you're ranged, you want to be really far to the edges of the arena because you can be behind some of these Demon Hunters and you can aim away from the raid. You can also make it just a lot easier for your allies to dodge by just taking up less surface area. So be, I guess, a couple steps away from the very edge of the room, and that'll help greatly with this intermission phase. Elisa, the Vengeance Demon Hunter, has a more chill intermission phase with Fel Devastation. This is basically a giant frontal that's going to just need to be dodged by players, so you want to watch where the boss is leaping towards and make sure you have, Wind Rush Totem, Stampeding Roar, maybe Lock Gateways ready to put down at a dime so that you can quickly just get out of the way of the frontal and you keep on dodging. Fractillus is the new Tetris boss. On this encounter, you're going to see 6 dark crystals that are facing and aiming towards the boss. You want to make sure that you put down different colored raid markers to mark down each of these crystals. The boss is going to knock back players and create walls, either blue walls or it's going to be void infused walls. And what's going to happen is when these walls are broken, the crystal blue walls are going to just emit shrapnel, which you have to dodge, just swirlies that you have under your feet. A void infused wall is going to debuff players, putting a circle onto their character, which explodes and hits anybody within 10 yards of them. Okay, so what's going to happen is you want to make sure that you stack up these walls, but not to, I believe it's 6 on PTR, otherwise it wipes the raid. So you need to spread them out, and every time a wall spawns, it rushes through your character and leaves a dot, which also can stack if you have multiple people in the same lane. Whenever you're going to spawn a wall, you're going to be targeted by the boss. It's going to be a void dark orb above your head, and then you're going to see a line from the boss that is going to show where all these walls are going to spawn. That's where you want to make sure you start spreading out from other players so that you can stack up the walls into different locations. Now, to clear the walls, multiple players are getting marked with nether crystallization, which is a white beam of light that comes down from the sky onto each of the players. This is where you're going to be able to start clearing some of the walls, and you can have multiple people stacked in the same lane, as long as if there's 4 walls, for example, you don't have 5 people there. One person is going to knock over one set of walls. That's how it's going to work. So you want to make sure people are still spreading out, finding different locations, and you need to get there fast because before the walls break, the boss roots you and then backhands you into the walls to break them. So the way we organize the fight is one of the middle lanes we marked as a safe zone, and then 4 other sections were marked for players to just be dropping off their mechanics. Then we also had a 6th lane for our tank because the Tank Buster Shockwave Slam also produces walls. From there, we were just making sure that players were watching for which side had too many walls. When they got marked by nether crystallization, they would go to those overloaded sides with too many walls and go make sure that they were breaking those. You start spreading out a little bit for the shrapnel and for some of the explosion damage that's coming out of the null explosion that marks players from clearing a void wall. And that's all the mechanics really for the fight. You really just need to make sure you're coordinating where the walls drop, make sure people are not stacking them too much, and you're good to go. The penultimate boss is Nexus-King Salhadaar. On this fight, the huge raid damage begins the encounter as you cast Decree Oathbound, doing a lot of raid damage and stacking up 3 applications of Oathbound. If a player dies or does not clear their oath in time, then they get mind controlled and you have to just kill them off in order to resurrect them again and get them back onto your team. The biggest thing in this phase is you need to finish the phase clearing all your stacks of your oath. Otherwise, the boss is going to mind control you. And so to remove them, you have to use the tank effects. You have Conquer and you have Vanquish. Conquer is how you are losing the stacks of Oathbound, and Vanquish is what's going to wipe you if your tanks are not on their game. What happens is the boss does a series of 4 of these attacks. He does 2 Conquers and 2 Vanquishes, but the order can vary a lot. And that's a huge problem with the fight, is you're going to need to have your tanks constantly communicating, aiming Vanquishes away, and having 2 different groups set up for players to clear their Oathbound stacks with Conquer. Once they take a Conquer hit, they potentially could take another one, but if you take another hit within 20 seconds, you're taking double damage, so you need to have a really strong defensive at hand. Ideally, you have the raid split in half so that one half is soaking while the other is removing their debuff and then soaking again. While the tank swaps are really hard for the tanks, the rest of the raid has to deal with a few different mechanics. Banishment puts dots on a couple different players that explode when their debuff expires, where you have to do a lot of spot healing to make sure that they're topped off in advance. He also empowers some of the Royal Voidwings around the room, where they will cast Behead. And what this does is it marks players with some of the Void Claws, basically. They need to run these out of the raid before a claw slashes from the void and creates a void zone and knocks that player back. You absolutely can be knocked off the platform by this. It's not a super strong effect, but don't run to the edges with it. And lastly, in this phase, you also have Besiege, which are these cutter beams raining down from the sky while you're also trying to soak, conquer, or dodge Vanquish. There's a lot of things that can kill you in this first phase, and so using all of your defensives, even your major raid healing cooldowns, needs to be a priority. It's a little bit tougher to organize raid cooldowns around the Conquer timings because they have some variance to it as well, which makes it a lot more challenging. As the boss casts Invoke the Oath, it'll then trigger his transition into Phase 2, where he coalesces a Voidwing and knocks players back. He then will be casting Netherbreaker, meaning the players are going to have to go to the edges of the room if they're targeted, as his mace is going to ricochet between all of these targets. You want to space all of those out. Big part of this phase is the Dimension Breath, which will target the tank, and the laser beams will spawn from additional portals on the edges of the room. This is just a massive breath that you have to make sure that you're dodging some of the beams from. It deals a tremendous amount of damage, and you just have to make sure that you're dodging in this phase. You also have to deal with the Behead just like you had before, causing the claw lines to come from the void and strike different players. As the boss goes into the intermission phase, he rallies the Shadow Guard, and you need to split the raid in half to be able to kill off the various adds around the room. The big thing you have to do here is kick the Nether Blasts from the Nexus Princes, and watch out for the mortars that are going out from the Manaforge Titan. The Manaforge Titan also is going to cast Self-Destruct at 100 energy, triggering that detonation and dealing a tremendous amount of damage, like 34 mil damage to the entire raid. Make sure you're focusing that one down while kicking each of the Nexus Princes. And then you have some of the Reapers, which are jumping onto targets, slashing them, and having a pretty nasty dot for 8 seconds. So lots of prio healing for the healers going out into this one. Prioritize first killing off the Titan before the self-destruct happens. Keep on kicking Nether Blast, and cleave the rest of the adds down. Coming back from the Shadow Guard intermission is going to bring you back into Phase 2. Keep in mind, you still want to be damaging the Royal Voidwing first, as entering into the end of Phase 2 into Phase 3 is going to trigger King's Hunger, where the boss consumes the Voidwing and heals himself for the remaining health. So focus on damaging that Voidwing first and just cleaving onto Salhadaar. The King's Hunger intermission phase lasts 30 seconds, and you have to dodge some more of the claw strikes going out around the room. There's another huge area for healing cooldowns, and once again, spacing them out over a very long period of time. You will have some pretty free damage as the boss begins the third and final phase, but you're also having players marked with that Galactic Smash, which is going to be spawning a variety of stars on each of the player's location, which then orbits around the room. These stars will then periodically ignite with extra spikes and extra fields that you have to dodge, and they also create void zones themselves, so you can't run through those areas either. The boss is going to cast Star Killer Swing onto various players, which allows you to break some of these crystals and break some of these stars that you have spawned. I believe when we tested it on PTR, it will also pierce the target. So if you can't get behind the void stars, that's going to be okay. You just need to make sure that you are aiming them at those locations to make sure that you are killing them off. The real threat in this final phase is not breaking enough of these stars, and then Galactic Smash comes out again, and you have a fresh set of stars orbiting around the room, and you're just running out of surface area in the fight. This is really just one of those like survive, do mechanics as best as you possibly can moments, as it's just going to be all chaos with the spawns for these stars until you're able to clear them up just a little bit more. While we haven't seen Dimensius throughout PTR testing, as it's the only boss that's not testable, we will have a single dedicated video to the encounter once we see it and kill it in person, rather than just reading you guys the dungeon journal. So be sure to check out our latest video at the very end of this, as it should hopefully have the link, or we'll have it very soon after the raid comes out. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys are enjoying this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe, as we're working on our 100,000 subscriber goal and making great progress towards it. Big love to our patrons for making all this content possible. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.